tuned into the truth frequency.
Your protection from deception. This is Truth Frequency Radio.
Well, good morning, Truth Frequency Radio. Bit of an odd one this morning, I'll tell you what. Apparently, all the write disk space on my laptop has been full. Got filled up over the weekend somehow, and I can't get most of my stuff to open on my laptop. Skype doesn't want to open, my soundboard doesn't want to open. I've got just a handful of things that are actually working. So I've just sort of hodgepodged this little broadcast together. I've got it on my other computer, so I'm going to be real curious as to how this actually turns out. But good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Ironworx. My name is Josh Corey. I am joined by my good friend and co-host, Mr. Walter Johnson. Walt, how you doing this morning?
Good morning, Josh. You know I'm always better when I get to hang out with you here in the morning on TFR with these beautiful people already hanging out and waiting for us in chat. It has been an interesting weekend, and it seems like this week is going to be interesting as well. I actually had a little update on my system, so maybe if you do that, it'll help. Of course, you're having a write disk issue, not a Skype issue, so I know sometimes we're fighting with our Skype system, but we're here. They're there. We're going to make this thing happen on this Halloween Eve, I guess.
Yeah, what a rotten day for me not to have my soundboard. Jeez. Would have been all sorts of fun stuff we could have done.
We'll still do fun stuff, I'll bet. We had something planned that we're going to attempt because that was the plan, but with this interesting disk issue, I don't know. We're going to see how it works. I suppose.
I mean, I think it'll work. I think it'll play because I'm not playing it through my soundboard. So it is luckily one of the few things that will actually open. So I can at least play it that way.
Well, we don't want to step on time frame. So how much of it is there? Did we ever determine that?
Almost all of it. There's a little bit of the second segment that got cut out, but actually works better because it's that second segment that runs a little bit long. So.
Right. Good deal. Well, I guess, is there enough introduction? Man, this is terrible. Should we preface this or should we just let it go? How do you think is the best way to approach this?
That's a good question.
Well, let's just say this. We have this recorded from literally almost a year ago. We had just maybe not that long ago. We started trying to get this interview together about a year ago because of her job, our time of the morning that we're here being so interesting for some people, especially over there where she lives. It just became difficult to do a live show with her. So we finally got together and through our ineptitude attempted to do a recording and have one ready in the can in case there was a day we didn't want to be here for some reason or couldn't be here for some reason. Well, so far the didn't want to be here day hasn't come. In fact, there's been 1 or 2 days we had to miss due to issues that really upset us both. We hate not being here. This is something we love doing. So that has sat in the can and sat in the can and sat in the can until it's like ridiculous that it's still sitting here, being that it is a topic that tends to bring a chill or two to my spine for damn sure. I thought it might be an appropriate time of the year to get this recording out of the can and throw it on here. But instead of turning it loose on you guys and us not being here, we're going to be here. We'll babysit it with you. We'll talk to you in chat. Any questions you might have, we'll try to address those as we can. But I met this lady, Debbie. Oh, my goodness. It's been a long time ago now. And you'll hear all of that in the recording. So rather than me rehash it and you hear it twice, I'll shut up now and let Josh take over.
Well, we're so glad to have you here. I'm sure I mangled that introduction horribly, but
It's a little bit of an emotional experience too, because it's been a long time, and when we did meet, it was a hugely emotional time for both of us, and that day was something else. So, but you've been, my goodness, you've been all over the place since last we spoke.
Yeah, it's been a long time. When I think back to that the experience that started the whole thing, that was June 30th, 1983. It's like, oh my God, it's been over 30 years. And I feel really old. You said something about, I was snickered to myself. Yeah, I'm older. But it's been a long time since that time in New Orleans, and when Bud was still alive and the book had just come out, and I was going around the circuit with him. My pseudonym in the book was Kathy Davis.
Davis, okay, there we go.
But that's okay, because my sister is Kathy Mitchell. That's her.
See, I'm tying it all together. It's all those connections that are all too old to reconnect, right?
Yeah, and a few years after Intruders was published, and having gone around and met a lot of people and spoke at a few functions about it with him, my sister and I, Kathy, wrote like a companion book to Intruders that was called Abducted, The Story of the Intruders Continues. So, and both of our real names were on that book as the authors. So, although at the time I was, I was Debbie Jordan. I since remarried, and so that's why I have a different name now. It's the same name. It's not a pseudonym. It really is my name. I just had a few of them. But but it's been a long time, and I'm like a completely different person from that girl that you met 30 some years ago.
And we both are definitely different people, trust me.
Better. I'm the new improved, the 2.0 version.
That's it. Well, I had kept up with you even after we, kind of lost contact, because back then, it wasn't the easy just pick up the phone and ... there they are. Back then it was real physical letters. In fact, I still have a few folded up in my copy that I have somewhere, Bud and I back and forth, and I think you were involved maybe in a couple there, but definitely, it was definitely a lot different back in the day to stay in touch. So
it definitely was, but I did with a lot of people, and then, but I kind of pulled away from the whole deal.
Yes, ma'am.
I kind of just, I don't know. My kids were at an age, and the guy that I was married to at the time, he passed away, and it was a traumatic time, and I kind of just receded. I pulled myself away from all of it for a while. But it was weird, because no matter how many times in my life I tried to back away from it and get out, just make it go away in my mind and try to be a normal person, have a normal life, it did not allow me to do that. Something always happened that kicked me right back into it. So yes. I made it kind of hard to stay in touch with me sometimes. I just wanted to be invisible. I always said I never sought this out. This happened to me. I did not try to make this be in my life. It just happened, and I tried to deal with it. Today so many people I see try to make, they want this to happen and be in there, and I just wanted to be normal and left alone.
Right. Well, that's why I went to that convention that day, was to figure out how to make a normal life out of this craziness that was just constantly intruders.
Yeah, I know. And
all my
then,
life,
it was different then. I mean, it's a lot more, although it's still weird and crazy, and people still kind of look at you and roll their eyes occasionally. But I mean, you can walk into Walmart now and buy a lunchbox or a t-shirt with an alien head on it, and everybody thinks it's cool. And now when I do talk about it, which I very rarely do, and even the people I work with, most of them have no idea who I am or what I've experienced.
Well, I hope we haven't brought you out there.
But hey, it is what it is.
Vast listenership.
I learned that people, nowadays anyway, when they hear about it, they want to tell me about their stuff.
Right.
You know, it's a different atmosphere than it was 30 some years ago when you were just literally, you know, attacked and, you know, ostracized and ridiculed.
And alone. That was the main thing. You just felt so alone. Yeah, you could read a book about it at the library. You could see a show about it on TV, but there was nobody that you could say, okay, they've experienced this and they know, and their family. I mean, that's what it felt like when you and I met. This is someone in family.
Well, you know what? That's what, and you know, it's just, I've met thousands of people over 30 years, and literally, you just connect with them. You know there's something different and special with them. You know what I mean? We've shared this experience, and you can tell when somebody's, you know, the real deal. Yeah. You can feel it.
Sorry, I get a little emotional. Definitely.
Y'all are clamped and everything.
Well, it's a thing that touches us all deeply that have been involved in it, and I mean, telling people, you know, this is what happened, and that's one thing, but knowing that other person has been in that terrifying experience. I mean, it's just
and you know what? And knowing that they can come out the other end and be a better person, and you know, although
so much stronger.
A lot of it was terrifying and scared the crap out of me, you know, and I was a wreck when I was younger, but honestly, now I can look back 30 some years later and say I wouldn't change a thing, because everything about my life and my weird experiences has made me who I am, and I'm pretty cool with that. So, and every day I'm still a work in progress, and every day I'm almost 60 years old, but every day I learn things new about the world around me and about myself. And, you know, I wouldn't change anything about my life at this point. Now, you know, 25 years ago, I might have said something different, but.
Well, you and I are just talking like, hey, this is what's up. We're just talking like old friends. So why don't we let Josh ask a question or two, maybe to kind of clue him and the rest of the listeners who don't have a clue what the hell we're talking about.
I know, right? Yeah.
What are we talking about?
Yeah, I'm just digging it. You guys go right ahead. Don't let me interrupt.
I have no clock. I have no reference to time frame. How close are we to break? Do you have a clue, Josh?
Yo, we've got a little bit of time. I would about maybe 12 minutes or so.
Oh, okay.
Give or take. We got plenty of time.
It just felt like I had been rambling. Okay. Well, do you want to just kind of summarize it? Would that be best?
Well, yeah. I mean, there's probably most of the people listening probably have no clue who I am or what I'm talking about when I refer to my experiences. But and it's very hard to condense it all down, you know, in 12 minutes.
Well, you have more than the 12. I'm just saying, if you want to tap into the beginning of it, we'll definitely continue after the break for sure.
I was a single parent living with my single parent of two little boys, and I had recently moved back home with my mom and dad. And while living in their house, my mother was involved in it as well. I experienced this extraordinary event that left a mark in the backyard that lasted for 5 years, and snow melted off of. It left me with memories of these creatures with black eyes. This was like child-sized creatures with big black eyes in the backyard. This craft, for lack of a better word. In retrospect, I don't think it was a craft that somebody flies, you know, from another planet in, because it was too small. And there were 6 of these little guys in the yard. And when they all went and moved into it, they would have been like clown
car.
Yeah, clown car deal here. So I don't know what that thing was in the backyard in retrospect, because it wasn't very big. It was about the size of my parents' pump house that was attached to the swimming pool, maybe about 10 feet tall, maybe, 10 feet in diameter all the way around. It's shaped like an egg, though, smaller at the bottom. And like I said, it left a mark in the yard. It left me sick for months. It basically, I think, killed the dog that was in the backyard with me that night. I'll go into more detail about that night later. I can't, if I get started on it right now, I'm going to screw up because, it's so long, and, I was living with my parents at the time, and I was getting ready to go sew with the neighbor behind us because she was paying me to cut patterns for her for extra money. So when I was out in the backyard, I was out in the kitchen getting ready to leave, and I looked out the window. I saw this weird light in the backyard, and it was in the pump house, and I knew that shouldn't be that way. And so I told my mom, I said, "You want me to check it out before I leave?" And she's like, "Yeah, if you want." So as I left, I drove along the side of the house, which there was another turnaround drive that led to the back of the house. And then so I went on the turnaround and I was coming back through, and the light was already gone. But instead of stopping, I just went to the neighbor's house because it was just one street behind us. And then I called her and I said, that light was gone when I drove back through. Do you want me to come back home? She's like, "No, that's all right. Don't worry about it. We'll be okay. I'll just lock the doors." And I'm not thinking about, any kind of weird stuff like aliens or UFOs. I'm thinking of burglars. You know what I mean? Or prowlers.
About somebody that shouldn't be around.
So Mom's locked. She said, "I'll lock the door. Don't worry about it. You're just one street behind. Your dad will be home before long," because Daddy was working second shift. So as soon as I hung the phone up, it rings again, and I immediately just picked it up, and it was my mom. She's sounding really weird. She's like, "I want you to come home right now." I'm like, "Oh, my God, what's the matter?" And when my friend's husband heard me say that, he's like, "Tell her to call the police. That's what they get paid for." And she heard him, and she's like, "No, I don't want anybody here but you." And I'm like, "Okay," because my mom never got scared of anything. So I knew something was up. So I got in the car and I hurried back home. And when I got out of the car, I went to the back of the house and I went in the back patio room door where she was standing, and I grabbed this shotgun that my father had behind the trash masher, which was not loaded. And she said, "That's not loaded, And I said, "I don't know. I know they don't know that. I can get up close enough to them to beat the shit out of them with it, and they won't know what hit them because they don't know it's not loaded." You know what I mean? So I went ahead and went out walking around back there and didn't see anything. Went back to behind the swimming pool to where my dad had his ladder truck, and I found my dog under there. She would not come out from under the truck. Something had spooked her. She was acting crazy. So I went back across the backyard into the open pedestrian door of the garage that was attached to the house. And I went in there and was looking around for somebody, and all of a sudden while I was in there, I felt like my body became on fire, just hot, burning from head to toe. And I remember thinking, "Oh my God, I got to get out of here." And I turned to run through the pedestrian door. And when I reached the doorway, something hit me in the chest. It felt like a punch in the chest I felt like I'd been hit by lightning or something. And I know my eyes were closed. They'd have to be because you would close your eyes. This blast of light was so intense. And honestly, in retrospect, I'm not sure whether it hit me in this solar plexus area, or it was coming out of me. I'm not sure which, but I know this sensation, this vibration, and the light was so bright and intense that it was painful in my eyes, and the vibrating feeling spread slowly from my solar plexus down my legs and arms, and I felt like I could feel every molecule of my body vibrate. Every molecule vibrate individually. I could feel it, and I couldn't move. And it seemed like time kind of stopped. It seemed like this went on and on for ever and ever, and yet I knew it was so intense that it would have killed me. It had to be only a moment in time, but time just kind of stopped. And then as quickly as it hit me, it subsided. The light, the intensity stopped. The vibration slowly stopped. I was able to make out some things in front of me out in the yard that were seemed to be moving around. It looked like 10-year-old size people in the yard, kids moving around. But my eyes were like blotchy, like flash bulb burned, where I couldn't see a lot of detail, but I could see the movement. And then I could see that soft ball of light in front of me about 20 feet, which was attached to this egg-shaped thing just off to my left. And I freaked out, and I thought, I can't look at it, that terror. I couldn't look at it, but I couldn't not look at it because I needed to know how close it was to me and if it was moving towards me. That kind of terror.
Right. Oh,
I mean, I've never.
Too well.
Yeah. And, my memory after that blast and seeing these things moving was a little broken. I saw that soft ball of light in front of me about the size of a basketball move down slowly and then back up again, and I felt like it was looking at me. I felt something pull on the back of my shoulder, and I felt this burning sensation in my ear, like I could have visualized like a hot knitting needle being stuck in my ear. Pain, but not being able to scream or move, and then hearing this voice that I could not tell whether it was male or female, and I couldn't see who was talking, but just it was like, was unfortunate that I had to feel that pain. It was not intentional. That imparted that kind of a thought in my mind. And then at some point I remember thinking, oh my God, my kids, because they were in the house with my mom. And immediately the same voice said, your children are okay. There's no need to worry about them. And then I heard my name, and it was like someone snapped their fingers, and I turned. I was able to move. As I walked, each step I took, the memory of what I had just experienced kind of just went away. By the time I reached the top of the steps where my mom was standing in the doorway, it was like someone snapped their fingers with her, and she's like, is everything okay? And I said, yeah, it's cool. But I didn't want to go back and sew anymore. So I called the gal that I was at, and I'm like, I don't feel like sewing anymore. But and I didn't tell her this, but I thought, I feel like gross, like I need to get wet or something. And it was a hot night. We have this swimming pool, and so she's like, well, let's just go swimming. So she came to my house with her teenage daughter, and we got in the pool for a few minutes. We were out there for a few minutes as we walked past through this area where I had seen these kids earlier, but no longer remembered seeing, moving around in the yard. The daughter stepped on something that made her feet burn and tingle and started to get numb, and we thought maybe she'd stepped on a bee or something because we didn't see anything. We got in the pool. All three of us started getting sick, nauseous and weird. And my vision started getting real foggy, and I noticed there were like halos around all the lights outside because this was not in the dark now. So we ended our our swimming thing early, and they went home, and I went to bed. And when I woke up the next morning, my eyes were swollen shut, and they were so bad and so painful that my mom took me to the emergency room, and everything just went to hell after that. If you need to take your break now, I can go on.
No, the reason I said, oh my God, is because when I was about, I guess, 10, 11 maybe, I had an experience where my eyes swelled shut. Like one morning, woke up that way, just completely swollen shut. And never had any kind of reaction to any food or anything like that. And went to the eye doctor, went everywhere, wound up going through all kind of series of allergy tests with a big cha-chunk poking holes in my back and putting all these different things that would cause, almost like some experiences apparently, because it was horrendous. This guy holding me down and punching these holes in my back to put these little droplets of stuff to see if I would react to different ones. And they finally determined that's what it was, although none of those things caused my eyes to do that, and nothing I've ever had a reaction to since then caused my eyes to do that. So that's something I never put. Anyway, I think we are getting close to break. Josh, what do we have left?
We got about 2 minutes, give or take a little bit, but yeah. So I think it'd be a good time to take a little break. Yeah. This is fascinating.
I'm dealing with a lot on this end, I know, and I'm sure Josh has 1,000 questions for when we get back from the break. Everybody who's listening, definitely just be aware that if this is something that perhaps you've dealt with in your life, I know hearing these experiences being recounted can be a little triggering at times. So definitely, if you need to take a break, go outside, take your shoes off, walk around on the ground, and just know it'll all be all right.
Every little thing gonna be all right. Nope, that's good stuff. I dig it. All right, well then I guess to round out this last couple minutes, I'll just remind you that you are still listening to the Ironworx right here on Truth Frequency Radio, your protection from deception.
Man, we almost hit that first break, didn't we?
We did pretty good, didn't we? That's close.
I'm impressed. And that was early. That was when we still were like wet behind the ears. We're so much better now. Well, thank you everybody in chat, and a special big shout out to our buddy Alan. So we are here for you, brother, always. You know this. And I see a lot of people in chat that, well, it's been an interesting conversation. We won't start that because we will run over to break. Thank you all for being here. I see some new folks. Hi, Viking Berserker. Glad to have you here with us. And Kev Baker. Glad to have you in the house, my friend.
Oh, welcome.
Lots of respect. Love your show. So glad to have you here with us.
Absolutely. Good morning. Of course, it's not morning where you are, but hello anyway.
Right. Indeed. So, man, I kind of lost it there for a second. I closed the wrong window. My apologies. Well, you definitely can find Debbie over on Facebook. She is about to launch a podcast of her own here. Well, when we talked to her, she was working on getting that all ironed out. She had actually, as you'll hear in the recording, she had kind of branched off into something different, some electro voice phenomena. So, again, appropriate for this time of season. We appreciate y'all being here. That's Josh. I'm Walt. You are listening to the Ironworx.
Real people, real radio.
Initiating the truth frequency.
This is Truth Frequency Radio.
I have come here to chew bubblegum and kick ass. I'm Neil deGrasse. I'm all out of bubblegum.
Well, I got a couple sounds loaded up. But, yeah, we don't have a whole lot of time to screw around here because this next segment on the recording is a little bit long, so we may even have to cut it short.
We have to break it. Right. So, well, that's awesome. Let's launch it. We don't want to miss any of it. So
let's do it.
This is amazing stuff.
Yeah, I just want to shut the F up and let Debra take it away.
Well, I had started with, at the end of the last segment, I was telling about my eyes being messed up. When I woke up the next morning, they were swelled shut and incredibly painful. So my mother took me to the emergency room. While I was there, was an eye doctor in the hospital that they got down there. And when he looked at me, he asked that if my mother could take me across the street to his office because they had better equipment there for him to better, examine my eyes. So I was moved across the street to his office. He looked me over really well. And one of the first things that he asked me was, had I looked into the arc of a welder's torch, which I promptly replied, no, which made no sense to me whatsoever, but no. he diagnosed me with, for the best of his ability, with some kind of horrible conjunctivitis, and I went through a couple of tubes of cream and eye drops for a couple of weeks. I was miserable. After that point, my eyes, and let me just say, after that point, my eyes were never the same. I became extremely farsighted, which I hadn't been before. In my 30s, I developed dry macular degeneration in both my eyes, and they first recognized I had cataracts in my early 30s. When I turned 50, I had to have both of my lenses completely removed and replaced, and I still have the macular degeneration, but it's stabilized with treatment with lutein and some other things that the eye doctors have me using. Yes. So I blame that night. I can't prove it, but as bad as my eyes were, and from that point on, they were never the same. But anyways, I get off track, but I just wanted to make, so I didn't forget to tell you that, and after that night, I was a basket case. I had, could not sleep at night when the sun went down. I couldn't go into the bathroom at night because the window overlooked that area where that mark in the yard developed. And it just I felt like something was going to grab me out of the window. I think had a nervous breakdown after that night. Within that following weekend, that was on June the 30th. That following weekend was the 4th of July weekend. And because we were the family with the swimming pool, everybody came to our house. And oddly enough, nobody, mom and dad or I had really not even looked out in the backyard after that night. And then when all the family came over, of course, everybody hit the door and was headed to the pool, all the kids, and immediately turned around and ran back in and said, "Grandma, there's something wrong with your yard." And so all of us adults were out there, and there was this mark. It just like popped up overnight. It was 8 feet in diameter, a circle. The circular part of it. It had a swath, line that came off of it that was 49 feet long, and it ended in a perfect arc. And all the grass inside of this area was like bent over and brown, and the dirt was so dehydrated that it was cracked. And there was a big crack on one side of it, and I stuck a little ruler down in it, like a 12-inch ruler, to see how deep the crack went, and I dropped the ruler and lost it. So it was more than 12 inches deep. But and my mom, out of the blue, for no reason whatsoever, pipes up with, that's where our UFO landed the other night, remember? And I looked at my mom and I thought, what in the hell is wrong with you? And then when I looked at the mark again, and it was like something in my mind just clicked. And it was, I said, it was like somebody pulled the finger out of the dike and the dam just busted. All of these memories started coming out, flowing, and as I looked at that mark in the yard, I couldn't even talk, but all I could see were those two big black eyes, like superimposed over this mark, and I just freaked out. It was from that point on that I started to remember a little bit of that night. I also started to remember other things in my past that had happened. And my family had always had strange things happen, things that you would be most people would consider as paranormal activity. It was kind of normal in my family. I grew up thinking that everybody had the weird stuff happen. I didn't know any different till I started going to school.
So you started talking about it, yeah.
And then I'm like, I better keep my mouth shut. These people are thinking I'm crazy. I like to have some friends. But that day, that night, or that weekend, it just like my whole life changed. And in retrospect, I often look back on that night in June, and I think that was the night that I died and somebody new was born. And because from that point on, my life was to never be the same. I had picked a book up out of the library. I always said I loved to go to the library because it was free entertainment. I had 2 little kids, and I could get all kinds of books to read to them and read to myself, and it didn't cost anything because I was a single parent with no money. And I had picked up a stack of books prior to this, and one of the books in that stack was called Missing Time, written by a man named Bud Hopkins. Mainly I picked it up because it had a bright orange cover with these great big letters, and I thought, ooh, that sounded interesting. It said something about abduction or something on the cover, and I didn't think about alien abduction. I was thinking about, like crime stories and stuff. But I picked it up, and I started to read this book and realized what it was. I started having panic attacks. And like in 1 week, I ended up going to the emergency room twice because I thought I was having a heart attack every time I tried to read this book, and it would freak me out. And finally my mom says, you need to take that book back to the library. We can't afford this. And I'm like, it's pretty bad when you go to the emergency room and the doctors know you by your first name when you come in. You got a problem. So, anyway, after this mark in the yard happened, and that was before this stuff happened in June, you know what I mean? So that tells you there were other things already in my past that were clicking back in the back of my head before anything even happened on June 30th. So after the June 30th thing happened, immediately once I started to remember things, my mind went back to that book, Missing Time. So I went back to the library and got it, because the way I read a book is I look at the pictures, if there is any. Then I read the cover, the side flaps on the covers, and then I read the back few pages, and then I decide whether it looks interesting enough for me to go into the meat of it and start reading it. Well, I knew in that book that there, in the back of the book, there was a place where you could write this guy if you had felt that you had these experiences. So I went back to the library and got this book, and I wrote this guy this 10-page letter, and I took pictures of the mark in the yard. And I kept writing it and throwing it away, starting over. And in the final draft, what I had decided to do was my older sister, Kathy, had an experience back in the 60s while taking my mother to a bingo game. And she claimed that once she dropped Mom off at the church for this bingo, she was coming back home, and she felt compelled to turn into another church parking lot, their Holy Spirit Church in Indy. And she claimed at that time there was a UFO hovering over the church, that her car was underneath of it in the back of the parking lot, and that it lifted her car up into it. And the next thing she remembered, she was back in the parking lot. It was now dark and now time to go pick Mom up. Many hours had passed. And, she told the story for years, and we laughed at her. We didn't not believe her, but, she was much older than us, so that's what siblings do. They pester you and laugh at you and make fun of you. But we always believed her. There was no reason to not believe her, and there was no reason for her to tell that story. She'd get mad and wouldn't talk about it anymore, so you knew it was serious to her. She wasn't playing. But so I decided to tell him about her story because it fit in with this whole book. And then at the very end, I'm like, oh, and by the way, there was this thing that happened here not too long ago, and here's these pictures. And then I thought, okay, so, I kind of threw her under the bus because I didn't tell her that I was going to write this guy. But I figured it was going to be, for naught anyway. I figured I'd ever hear from him again. And I gave Mom the letter, and I asked her to mail it for me. And then years later, Mom said, I carried that letter around in my purse for a couple weeks. And at one point, I actually even thought about throwing it away and not even mailing it to this guy. And she goes, and for something in my head said, just do it. So she said, I finally pulled it out of my purse one day when I happened to be at the post office, and I did mail it. I was out I don't know, it's been a couple months, maybe a month or so later, didn't think anything else of it, was having nightmares and not able to sleep and panic attacks and remembering crazy stuff. And I went out with some friends one night, and when I got home, Mom was laying on the couch, and she woke up and she said, you know what, that guy that you wrote that letter to from that book called. And I went, what? She's like, yeah, he called. He wants you to call him back. I'm like, oh my God, what do I do? I freaked out. And in the end, I called him. And from that point on, it was a 3-year investigation from him. He came to Indiana several times and interviewed neighbors and friends and my boss and coworkers, and walked the streets knocking doors in the neighborhood. And I actually sold my washer and dryer that I had put in storage when I moved back home to get enough money to get a bus ticket to go to New York, and which was a big deal for me. I had never been anywhere, and I had this fear of getting lost that had stemmed from an episode in my childhood where I was actually missing for a whole day. And I laugh, as I said, at one point on the bus to New York, I had this little epiphany, like, what in the hell are you doing? You just took every dime you had. You're on a bus going to New York City. Here's this little girl from Indiana, never been anywhere. To see some guy who wrote a book about UFOs. What are you, crazy? He could be an axe murderer. He could be an axe murderer. What are you doing? Are you nuts? But that's how desperate I was for help. Because by then, I was a hot mess. I couldn't function. Thank God for my parents. I was having all these nightmares. I did this thing where I could drive down the street, and this image or a words or a picture, it would come in my mind, and it would be so intense that I couldn't function until I pull over and write it down or draw it. It would wake me up in the middle of the night, these images, these visions of these things, these shapes and these words and phrases, and I would have to write them down. I kept notebooks next to my bed, and I would draw these pictures and these images and shapes and write these words down. This went on for a whole year, and then it stopped as abruptly as it had started. And that started right after the June 30th, 1983, and went on for about a year and a half, which some of that ended up being published in my book, the second book, Abducted. But Bud withheld a lot of it in the Intruders book for control purposes, because he knew that once that book was published, there would be a lot of people that would come forward that had these experiences. He didn't want them to have been contaminated with my stuff so that he could, use it for research later. But at the point that I published it, his book had been out a while, and a whole bunch of people started coming out of the woodworks. But anyway, so that's how I got connected with Bud Hopkins to begin with. I had a voice stress test. It's like a lie detector test, which I passed. Basically, guys told Bud, she believes what she's telling you. That doesn't mean it's real. This guy was freaked out by the questions that Bud was having me ask, but he said she definitely believes what she's saying. So, that's all I could do is tell him what I believed would be the truth, the truth to the questions. Bud had me meet with a psychiatrist named Dr. Aphrodite Clamar in New York City, who did a light induction on me as far as hypnosis goes, but I didn't really remember anything that day with her. It was mostly just to introduce me to the process and to understand it better, so I wouldn't be afraid of it. And then he hooked me up with some people at, I think it was Columbia Hospital in New York City. They did an EEG of my brain, and they did a CAT scan with a dye contrast, and they did 6 hours of psychological testing. And I also had some verbal psychological testing, to see if I was crazy. And I remember telling the psychiatrist, I remember telling him, I said, it's okay if I'm nuts, because I know they make pills for that, and that's fine. I'll take the pills.
You fix that. You fix
I'll
crazy.
take this away. That's cool. I don't have a problem with that. But they only could determine that I was of above average intelligence, did not suffer from any delusions or any. I didn't have the only mental issue that I had was anxiety. And they felt that I exhibited symptoms of post-traumatic stress, which at that time wasn't anything that I think was really widely known like it is now. And Bud always said, well, you have to have something very traumatic to make you have the symptoms of post-traumatic stress. Well, I'd had a normal life as far as I knew. I mean, we had some weird stuff, but nothing that would have caused anything like that other than this, UFO stuff, the encounters that I'd had. Now, and I started remembering after that point in 83, I started to remember other things that had happened in my life that had been just like put in the back recesses of, everybody has weird things that happen to them. And they think, oh, that was weird. And you try to figure out, what it could have been. And when you can't, you just kind of file it away in the weird pile back in the back of your head, I had a bunch of that.
Yes, ma'am.
And there was one time when I was first married to my first husband, I woke up because these two men, I called them, were in my room. This is back in the mid-70s, late 70s. They were about maybe, about 4.5 feet tall, big heads, no hair, kind of pale skin, big black eyes, teeny little mouth. They spoke to me, but their mouth didn't move. And they were holding a small black box with a red light on it. And when I first...
We seem to have run into a technical glitch, Josh. We may have lost Josh completely. We may have crashed Josh's computer out.
Yeah, my laptop shut down. I don't know what the sorry. I don't know what's going on. I don't guess you're in the vault, are you?
I am in the vault, sir.
Oh, so we may still even be broadcasting, except
Absolutely.
for the fact that we're not playing. Sweet.
Absolutely. Yeah, I always hop in the vault just in case you do get shut off. We've learned that trick early on. So, well, that's awesome, man. Well, why don't you try to do a little reset on that end, and I will.
All right. Well, it looks like it's booting up, so I don't know. We'll see.
Well, there we go. We're still here, but we lost the audio source there, everybody. Sorry about that. Look, the suspense. Well, I will tell everyone that knowing Debbie at the time I knew her, it was a very important thing in my life. I had been through, and not just my whole family, and not just my immediate family, my extended family, cousins, grandmother, grandfather. I mean, these types of experiences and others were pretty much the norm throughout my life. And finding someone who not only had experienced it, had lived through it, and had grown so much from it was really a lifesaver at the time. When there was a big push during that time period, lots of television shows had hit the airwaves about these topics, which was exciting in the fanboy aspect of it all, because that's what the whole plan was, to turn it into this big, accepted, it's cool alien thing that it has become. Aliens. It got really to a point, though, at that point, when she and I met each other, none of that had started happening. It was just, there was nobody out there talking about all this. There were a few video shows on that would show you lights in the sky and would kind of hint around about, beings and things like that. But like topics about abduction, Whitley Strieber's book had just come out. It was terrifying. This book, the abduction encounter at, Intruders Encounter at Copley Woods book that Bud wrote, terrifying, the experiences that they talked about. And in her book, and she'll probably get into that too if we can ever get it back on, it is something that had been going on throughout her life. When she talks about that time when she was a kid that she was missing for a whole day, in the book, she goes into that a lot more, and how that does tie into this lifelong experience that this was revealed to be to her over time. And, oh man, it's something else and it's hard to deal with. It's very emotional for those who are in it. It's this time of the year, especially when frequencies get a little on the spookier side, if you will. It definitely is something that is, they just seem to be a lot closer, I guess, this time of the year. The veil is a little thinner, perhaps, this time of the year. And being a flat earther, if you will, we've definitely dispensed with the idea of these things being from other spinny space pairs flying around other burning yet not burning stars and other distant galaxies. So where are they from? And I don't really know if we addressed that much with Debbie because we had gotten so into her story. We may have touched on it a tiny bit. I don't remember. We'll see. But definitely the idea that these beings have been here forever, that they are from somewhere else beyond what we consider our boundary, the wall, if you will, the Antarctica ice wall, especially after we've uncovered a few maps that seem to indicate there are lands beyond that area. It's, it kind of fits together a little bit. And with all the weirdness that is pointed to about Antarctica, even from the ballers, it's definitely an interesting place.
Well, I believe we're back up and running.
Are we? How much time do we actually have, though? Let me go pop back over to the vault. So we got 3 minutes. I guess we could.
There's only 3 minutes left?
To the next break. Yes, sir.
Oh, jeez. Well, I don't know. What do you think? We skip ahead on this one? Stay on track?
It's been so long since I've listened to these recordings. Shame on me.
I know me.
That I don't really know. I don't want to miss anything that's awesome, and I don't want to try to find stuff and get lost in that. So, I guess we'll just let it roll, and if we have to cut it short, we can continue it at the next Friday show as a finish up.
It sounds like a plan.
I kind of forgot about it after, a few days of freaking out and not being able to go to sleep because I was afraid they'd come back. And he kind of convinced me that it was just a dream and a figment of my imagination, and I kind of calmed down. Well, that popped back into my memory. Lots of things popped back into my memory after that night. And then I started encountering strange people, and having all kinds of, other weird little experiences and things that happened. A lot of paranormal activity really ramped up in the couple of years following that, not just in my home with my mom and dad and me, but in my, other siblings' homes and even some of my neighbors' homes. And, I've had the
that
weird
aspect of this whole thing is always something that I point back to when people go, "Oh, you're just in that little dream state before you go to sleep. Oh, that's just sleep paralysis. Oh, you're just saw swamp gas reflecting off Venus, reflected off the edge of the." When I hear that over and over, it's like, okay, well then explain how this room full of people experienced this. It's and they're not all sleeping with me, so.
Mm-hmm. Because, my mother and I witnessed a craft that October. I think it was in October, the following April. I can't remember which date it was because, it's been a long time and I'm old. But I know that Mom and I both witnessed this craft float over the house. It was huge. It almost blocked out the sky, this triangular shaped thing with crazy bars of light on it. And we assumed that the whole city was going to be lit up with, police, and this was the weirdest thing we'd ever seen, and that there would be reports on TV, and nothing. Not a single word was mentioned on radio or television the next day. And we, at that point, Dr. J. Allen Hynek was at the Center for UFO Studies in Illinois. And
Truth Frequency Radio is your number one. This is Truth Frequency Radio.
The wicked ones obviously under heavy Masonic influence.
with us because they didn't like cases that involved entities that were seen because they were more focused on the nuts and bolts stuff. Dr. Heineck was gracious enough to
show me the video, show me a piece of foil, something.
So, and we drew pictures for him, and we spoke to him on the phone many times. We never met in person. He was a lovely man and very nice. And he said, he was a skeptic in the beginning, and he was the civilian that worked on Project Blue Book for the Air Force back in the 50s and was the consultant for Close Encounters of the Third Kind when Steven Spielberg made that movie. And so we felt lucky that he cared enough to want to try to help us. And he made a comment to my mother one time on the phone that in his years of research, he had gone from being a skeptic and trying to debunk everything to a believer. And he also felt that that some people may not be able to see these things, that this weren't meant for everyone to see. And in other words, you could put 10 people out in a field and you could have an event happen right over their head and not, and then maybe only 6 of those people would see it, or maybe only 3 of those people would actually see it.
I think that has a lot to do with frequency, vibration, where you're at in your life as far as your personal vibration.
And you know what I say, and I've always felt like there was a connection between paranormal activity and UFO activity, that there's some kind of connection. And so far the only thing I've found in my own research is the common denominator is the experiencer themselves. And I've decided that we are tube-type radios in a Dolby digital surround sound world, okay? Like, we're not even, wired to receive a fraction, or half of what goes on around us. And, as an example, your room that you're sitting in right now is full of television signals and video signals and television signals. Yeah. But unless you have a television receiver that's made to receive those, you're not going to see them. You aren't going to be able to pick that up with a radio, And I feel like that's what our brains are only wired for a certain amount of what actually is going on around us. And I think that there might be a couple of people here and there that might have a little extra connection somewhere in that computer brain of theirs where they can. Maybe my family has an extra connection somewhere in the brain that we're, either.
I think that has a lot to do with it, truly.
Yeah, I do. I really feel like that.
And the way it stays within families like it does, I know with my family, it definitely goes throughout the family. It's not just me and my sister and my immediate family, my cousins, my aunts, my uncles. 4 generations at least.
Yes. So, yeah, I don't know.
My grandmother's the one who, whenever a relative would pass, she would get the visit that night and then tell us all the next day before anyone would get a phone call or somebody would drive up, tell us that whoever had passed away, Grandma knew about it. That's been, my great-grandma would tell, oh my goodness, the stories. Let's don't get into another story. Another show here. But definitely frequency and vibration, I think is key to all of this. And then some of the things I've looked into over these last couple of years makes me think it also is tied into the bloodlines, the genetic bloodlines that are key to some of the history of this world.
Well, like I said, maybe, I think we're made a little differently in some ways somehow. Exactly. And I always used to say to Bud, remember I told you I had all those thoughts and things that would come into my head, and I would have to write them down or they wouldn't leave me alone. And then once I wrote it down, it would go away. I can remember one thing was, light can be used for travel and for healing and for nourishment. Just little blurbs like that and stuff. One of the things that I wrote down was that the answers are in the blood. Look in the blood.
Yes.
Look in the DNA. The answers in the blood. Bud he didn't know what to do with this. And this is 30 years ago. So he would just
that's amazing.
It, but and then it's funny because a lot of the designs that I drew in the early 80s in 85, 86, turned up in crop circles in the early 90s. Almost identical in some instances. And I'm not the only one who did that, because I had met many people who were drawing the same thing. It's that, you remember in Close Encounters of the Third Kind when all those people were drawing that devil,
right,
or making them, that's kind of like where Dr. Hynek got that idea. We're drawing pictures. And I mean, this was in the 80s. I think the Close Encounters was that in the late, like 78 or something.
78, 79, something like that. I think so. Yeah.
But see, so it was happening even before it was happening to me and all these other people. And only it wasn't Devil Tower, Wyoming. It was crop circles that were showing up 10 years later. And I realized there's a lot of crop circles that are made by some really talented crop circle makers now. And, a lot of them are made by people. There's no doubt about that. But occasionally one would pop up, and for some reason or another, when I would see them, I would get a different kind of a feeling in my gut, like a tingling sensation in my head that would tell me this one's not a man-made one. I can almost tell you which ones based on the feeling I got when I looked at these designs, and as if they were meant to trigger something in our mind. But symbols like that carry a lot of power. Symbols have been used throughout everything to form this world. Basically, it's built on symbols. And you see, I've changed so much from then